Hey there, listeners, and welcome to season 2 of Project Zero. Goal's the same as last year. We're going to hear from some of the journeys of some of the best project leaders in the game. This season, we're doing something a little different, though. We're leaning in, like everyone else in the world, and talking about that little thing called AI. We're seeing how AI is impacting the industry, and we're doing that all through the Project Zero story. My name is Alex Tuck, and I am the host. I am here with program consultant at Rhino Healthcare Solutions, Tom Cooper. Welcome to the podcast, Tom.
Hey, Alex, great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear about your Project Zero. It's a
We'll
fun
get
one.
to that.
Start us off. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do.
I came to project management pretty slowly in my career. I actually began in the banking, financial markets industry. I was working for JPMorgan Bank and I ran their floor operation in Chicago. And then I decided to try my luck as a trader. I did that for many years. And it was only after the exchange-based business model began to go electronic that I kind of dabbled in, software development for pricing of high frequency trading strategies. And of course, as the guy who understood kind of the business process and the decision making, we were suddenly hiring programmers who didn't understand that. And so I had to get into the project management side to help develop some of that software. And that's really how I begin my project management career.
Interesting. Cool. And you left out the part about being this, movie star, right?
They did shoot that film on the floor of the Mercantile Exchange, trading places back when I was a young man. Yeah.
We should look you up in IMDb and make sure you get the credit you deserve.
Right.
All right, Tom, start us off. So you mentioned that's sort of how you got into project management to begin with. Take us a little bit further in the journey. What'd you do after you started playing around on the engineering side?
Yeah. I get in as a stakeholder, as a principal, right? As a business owner. And at that time, I was kind of aware of project management. If somebody had asked me what waterfall was, I wouldn't be able to tell them. Of course, this is right around the time of the Agile Manifesto in 2001. So the world in software delivery was about to change, and it was before social media, really. Anyways, we had some successes, more failures than successes. For some reasons, I ended up leaving the industry, and I get into a nascent kind of green business called green roofing that kind of emerges in the 2000s as a result of the urgency of controlling stormwater, which is the major source of pollution in some of the older cities in the United States and in the world. And the city of Chicago mandates the construction of green roofing on commercial buildings. 50% of it needed to be covered to control stormwater runoff. And our little startup company, Green Roof Solutions, is perfectly placed to take advantage of that, totally by accident. Our advantage also was that, we understood how to build those components and put them on roofing, made us immediately like consultants to the roofing contractors who had never seen anything like this before, right? And we built these components and sold them to roofing membrane manufacturers so that they could wrap it into their warranty packages. So it was a win-win for many people in the building enclosure space. That evolves, and we incorporate a technology called electronic field vector mapping, which allows you to detect leaks through the soil on a green roof. And we promote that technology and wrap it into, building automation. So for lighting, energy control, security, those type of things, it becomes part of the larger package. And that's really, how I kind of build on, the skill set by doing, right? I wasn't a PMP at that point, but I did have a lot of construction stories. And when we landed the Music City Center in Nashville, which has a 200,000 square foot green roof, the story of that construction became, like a 5 to 10 minute presentation that I would do to architects and at the Project Management Institute conference. And it was pretty entertaining, right? Because stuff happens when you're building outdoors. So it became a risk mitigation discussion. And I used to kind of drive that home. And of course, risk mitigation is one of the primary responsibilities of a project manager.
For sure. So is it fair to say that's your project zero right there, that build? Or
One of those projects was a project zero. And it was a unique project. We built a green roof. We didn't build a green roof. There was a green roof on the King County bus terminal north of Seattle. The green roof was actually a city park. So the bus terminal was underneath the city park.
Mhm.
And the terminal was covered with 3 or 4 feet of soil. And the population of that neighborhood were largely Pacific Islanders who had a cultural affinity for barbecuing in a pit on the weekend. Now, can you imagine you're digging a hole in what you think is earth, and you get down 2 feet and you reach a coal tar pitched roof. And so you start throwing in your charcoals and your pig, and you cover the pig with banana leaves, and that fire slowly creates leaks in the roofing membrane. And when it rains, the lime and the concrete was dripping on the buses and stripping the paint off, causing millions of dollars worth of damage. So King County bought our leak detection system. We excavated the entire whole roof and we put on the leak detection system. But when we completed the installation, our system was operating on the original DOS operating system.
Nice.
This was around 2012, which, if you may remember, was the time of the Target point of sale hack.
Mm-hmm.
This was a system that was basically hacked from outside through the HVAC system, and DOS didn't have any of those security protocols that separated internal systems in a building. So that happened, and we realized that our DOS operating system was a vulnerability, and we had a pipeline full of these projects sold. And in our risk mitigation, I had to figure out how to finish that implementation and then pivot our operating system to BACnet, which was a rising kind of standard for, HVAC and building system automation. So I was kind of front and center as a project manager, and I guess you would call me a product owner now, although I didn't even know what that term was. We had to create the first cloud-based alert for that building. Basically, we had the controllers send an email and a message to a server at our warehouse, and then we would manually just send notices to the building manager if there was a leak. That's how we mitigated it in the short run, but had to think on our feet on that one.
Crazy. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So what was the biggest disaster? Anything crazy happened that you all had to work your way through on that project?
Yeah, I think selling the building owners on the mitigation, right? Convincing the IT security team that this was not going to compromise their system, that it would be completely off their network until we got BACnet configured. And then getting our German components manufacturer to adopt BACnet was a selling effort, right? So you have to sell the client on your mitigation, and then you have to sell the supplier on your solution. So
Yeah.
that really, we had a couple of other projects coming up, and we really had to move fast and spent a little money, I think, to get that done. But
Yeah. It's so tricky. Like I tell people, a couple shows ago, we were talking about, honestly, like as a PM, you are a salesperson, right? Like you're constantly trying to motivate, negotiate up, down, and sideways to move things forward in a project. And I think a lot of people underestimate that. They don't think of themselves as sales.
managing expectation is the toughest challenge, right? And that expectation is varied between people who know what they want and people who are not enthusiastic stakeholders, right? We've all dealt with people who don't want a project to succeed for whatever reason. It is a challenge. It's a personality challenge. It's a communication challenge. I think that's what I like about it, actually.
Yeah, yeah. Oh God, it's the best. It's the best. So that was business number one, transition out of finance, and then you moved into healthcare, right? Talk to me about how that pivot happened, and what was different about moving into that space.
Yeah. So some of our systems were adopted by healthcare providers, primarily in an advent of a building strategy that incorporated roof gardens into healing gardens. So you would have radiation therapy centers that would have a garden roof, and that would be attached to, say, the lobby where patients would go and wait for the radiation therapy or, go out to recover, right? A couple of hospitals in Chicago built these systems, and I was front and center working with the internal IT people, because some of these amenity spaces were built over climate controlled rooms, right? Rooms that had dialysis machines or data centers in them. So this became kind of a critical infrastructure. And through that, I learned a lot about, building management systems and healthcare, priorities. Our company kind of ran the gamut. We were a one-trick pony. We couldn't incorporate any other, building automation systems. So we sold it. And then I decided to get my PMP. And I'm living in Nashville, and I end up meeting the woman who would become my next wife. And so now I can't leave. And, people know Nashville is a music city, but really the primary industry is the healthcare industry, right? It's a home for HCA. It's a home for community health systems. And of course, now Oracle has merged with Cerner, and they're going to make it their headquarters. Hospital data, healthcare insurance, Cigna had one of their headquarters here. It became a natural segue for me. I first sold myself to the Bureau of TennCare as a business process analyst after they lost the class action lawsuit for not implementing the Affordable Care Act efficiently. And from there, I was able to touch, through consultancies and full-term positions, every aspect of, healthcare insurance and clinical implementation. So I was pretty lucky in that pivot and where I lived at the time.
Yeah. And I do want to call out, Tom, you cold outreached to work your way into that space. And I think it's I think that's like the greatest piece of advice you could give to any young person that's trying to do something they don't think they're qualified for, or they think that they have transferable skills for. Just reach out and help them understand that you have the ability to solve a problem that they have. Right?
Yeah. Never disregard the written letter. So I read in the Nashville Post that the first implementation team, which came from Department of Human Services, had kind of failed in implementing this rapid adjudication task force for a backlog of 14,000 Medicare applications. Mm-hmm. And they put in a new person in charge. And I gave his name, where he worked, and I said, I'm just going to write the guy a letter. So I wrote him a letter, and I talked to him about my background and kind of oversold myself a little bit. And he called me and brought me in and introduced me to his director, Chris Holt, who was a great guy I got to be good friends with, who was the director of the Appeals and Operations Group. And that's where all the work was being, was needed. And Chris really needed a right hand. So I jumped in and had this ability to kind of create order out of white space, which he really needed at the time. He gave me the legal construct, and I followed that to the T, right? And built those steps from, valid process dispute, to adjudication and establishment of continuation of benefits. So it was a great learning experience.
Oh yeah. I can only imagine. And, we talked about this during our first call. I have a full appreciation for how crazy the ACA was to implement. And we did it here in Vermont. And actually was a ACA consultant all over the country. And so every state was doing it differently. Every state was struggling to comply because the law was so complex, right? The rules were so complex. They were constantly changing. It was a political, crazy, like nuclear football, it was just kept getting passed around.
And big manpower demand, right? Nothing was automated. It's huge manpower demand.
Yeah. I mean, there are some states, and I won't name them, still some states that manually process a good chunk of their work because it was easier than trying to automate it. Yeah. Hopefully with AI, they're changing and they've caught up, but
yeah,
there's a lot of person power there. for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So talk to me after that, stayed in healthcare. What are there any other really exciting projects that you worked on? Any companies that were really exciting to work with?
I worked in the business PMO for TennCare, and was responsible for a, a varied number of project implementations and a new RFP for pharmacy benefit manager. Kind of threw myself into that and learned about pharmacy benefit management in the process. And then I got an opportunity to join Community Health Systems, which is a large hospital operator in Franklin, Tennessee. And I was hired by the chief information security officer to implement their data governance system, which would basically have all the IT directors report, any security and information threats that they experience in the individual IT systems to a central platform that would give the report to the chief information security officer. And once we stood that up, there's some hurdles we had to get over, new SQL servers that needed to be licensed, expiring SQL Server licenses and all those kind of things. It was pretty successful. A recruiter reached out to me regarding my pharmacy benefit manager experience, and I was hired by a large healthcare insurer that just bought a PBM.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this was a 2-year project that got shortened to 6 months, and it was all hands on deck. So that was a pretty exciting project. I had to wait for the Department of Justice to approve the merger of the Medicare portion of the business.
Yeah.
Commercial side was already in flight. And then they gave me the go-ahead on Christmas Eve, and I got the offer letter on the day after Christmas, and I started on January 4th. So
Oh my God. Yeah.
it was pretty exciting.
I worked for a few large health insurers, so I have experienced the same turnaround. I've actually made the hire for waiting for that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's pretty wild. Cool. Thanks for those stories. Would like to shift gears a little bit right now and start getting into some of the advice. Like you've had a storied career in multiple industries, right? And so just want to learn from you about, project management, where you see the industry going, all of that stuff, right? So, but let's start with the question I ask almost everyone on the show. What do you think the number one skill is for a project manager, and why do you think it's so important?
So we touched on it a little bit earlier, clear communication and the ability to mirror and match the personality types you're going to see, particularly through larger organizations, right? Personality types in accounting and financial management are a little bit different than strategic leaders, and they're very different from, your kind of IT teams, right? And so understanding those kind of profiles, being very measured in your communication and clear in your communication, understanding the lingo. Any organization has its own lingo, and you have to kind of not be afraid to ask questions. I think that is probably one of the most effective skills you could have as a project manager. The other methods of managing scope, schedule, and budget, kind of fundamental, right? And some projects don't have budget, right? So those things can change. Your tools for managing those three stools of those three legs of the stool are kind of the same, and they've gotten better, but being the center of the communication channel across all of those channels and keeping your communications clear and concise, I think is the most effective skill set a project manager can have.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I think it's, the nuance that you described, right? Because, everyone knows communication is important for any leader, right? But the nuance that you described about being able to speak the language of all the different stakeholders, right? And meet them where they are and to ask smart questions. Right. I think that's the thing that I see most with young PMs or project coordinators, right? They feel like they have to fake that they know everything. Right. And the truth is a good PM does the opposite. I had someone on the show that was like, honestly, I fake that I'm dumber than I really am because, I want them to explain what they do just so that we don't miss anything. And but it is an art though. It's an art to, gaining the respect of the stakeholders while at the same time asking good questions because you've been paying attention.
Yeah. I took a sales course one time,
Mhm.
It's called the Sandler method.
Yep.
And I learned a very valuable technique there called the pain funnel. And I keep going back to that because, stakeholders, value stream teams aren't used to having people ask them questions. And sometimes they're not willing to answer them, not because they're trying to hide something from you. It's because they don't want to answer them from themselves. They have
Mhm.
pains inside their own perspective on a project, something they don't want to do, something that's going to be hard, something that's going to add more work. And, sometimes you have to be prepared to ask not one question, but three,
Mhm.
because you can expect that the first question you'll get, the answer will be intellectual smoke, not intentionally, but just because they don't want to admit that they've got this pain.
Uh-huh.
And then the second question kind of gets a little bit closer. Usually by the third question, the person's admitting to themselves, yeah, I got this pain. I don't think we can do this in time. I need more resources. I'm going on vacation in 3 weeks and I haven't
Right.
told anybody this. So I kind of stick to that. You don't always get a chance to ask three questions, but when you do, sometimes it's the most effective way to pull the thread on extra scope or potential risks. Just
Yeah. No, I love that advice. And I mean, we are in this industry, project management, circa 2000. Like nobody, it existed, PMI existed. There was stuff, people called things project management. It was mostly like construction project management, like engineering stuff, right?
right.
And then, it wasn't even until like 2010s, right? Like 2011, 2012, PMI started really publishing and getting traction about the value of project management. And then everyone saw, oh, wow, the fastest growing jobs in the country and the world are project management. And like started to get a lot of people in the industry. And what we saw during that period, I think it's stopped now. I think we've stopped seeing this anymore. But there was this huge injection of folks that like really didn't know what they were doing. Right. And so we had like good PMs and bad PMs, and we were all just figuring it out. And so we're trying to like make up for that now. Cause like when you go and ask those folks, the stakeholders, like, hey, ask these questions, they're going to like, you see a lot of shutdown, or you used to a lot more and less now, because everyone thought that you were just like trying to bug them about a task and like when it was going to get done, right? And that's how they viewed project managers, right? And so I think our industry's done a good job of creating value and demonstrating the value that exists in the space.
And there's still those shops where people consider project management a challenge to their authority.
That's
I
right.
mean, you know, it's people aren't used to, there's some, particularly in startups, right? Where everybody's wearing multiple hats, right? Because they have
Mhm.
to. And you're on a shoestring. You know, project management skills and methodologies can be a challenge or a threat to some people. And that's a growing pain.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's tricky. And, I think it's all about like, our company focuses specifically on like small businesses, startups, like up to 250 people is sort of our sweet spot. And, we don't throw the PMBOK at anybody, right? You need a handful of tools and that's it. Make sure that we're all on the same page, make sure there's some status reporting, make sure we have risk and issue management, and that's it, right? Like it's
Right.
really lightweight. And if you come in with a heavy hand, like no one's going to trust project managers again. Right? So,
That's true. That's true. Yeah. And there are a lot of firms, particularly in startups, who lob onto these apps, right?
uh-huh.
Slack,
Yeah.
Jira, and they think that's their project management strategy. But, you know,
Yeah.
just because you put something in Slack doesn't mean it's documented.
That's right. Ugh, yeah. Let's talk about the topic of the hour, which I don't think is going to be the topic of the hour. I think it's going to be the topic of the next decade. But, you know, how are you seeing AI impacting project management? And like, where do you think it's going to go in the next few years?
Yeah, I think, it's definitely going to change all of our lives in the next few years. The pace of the change is going to be individual, organizational, industry wide, right?
Mhm.
So some industries will adopt it more than other industries. Certainly, the software developers who create tools that we use, like Jira, like Atlassian, they are on the leading edge of implementing AI agents inside their software to make your job easier. Like, for instance, you know, one of the things I commonly do is I'm a Jira policeman. right? People don't put the business value, metrics for success in epics and user stories, right? Then you get this ping-ponging effect between dev teams and product owners. What did you mean by this? What do you mean by that? Are we doing this? Are we doing that? That wastes time. That's a management tax on the project delivery. Jira now has an application, where you just press a button and help me improve the writing of this, and it can adopt, a business value statement. As a sales manager, I want to see this do this so that when it does this, we get success here and here, right?
Yeah.
That's really the way a story should be written. And now it basically does it for you.
Yeah. It's unbelievable what's happening right now. It's very cool. What's the coolest application of AI you've seen out there? Just forget about project management. What are some exciting things that you've seen AI do?
A business startup that I was involved in, and we were kind of working on RNAi targeting for drug opportunities with a friend of mine who I met a long time ago when I was in the financial business. Some of those things were pretty novel. We never really secured any funding, but I learned a lot about gene editing.
Yeah.
Just doing that on the side. I think some of these agents that allow you to glean information across, say Slack and Jira, right? So that you can clarify what people say from what they might mean. It's a huge communication tool. I just know in my own health, I created an AI sparring partner. As an avid cyclist, I kind of balance what my doctor is telling me about my need for statins to, what I think the real issues are. I think it's overtraining.
Yeah.
And, I kind of helped him identify that I had a slightly weak thyroid. And he goes, "Oh yeah, you decided to test for that?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, why don't you take some thyroid medication?" I'm like, okay. I think it really, you have to embrace it, and you have to really throw yourself into prompt engineering. And one thing I learned from Claude is it's not just what you want an AI agent to do for you. You have to specify what you don't want it to do for you.
Yeah.
Okay. You have to be very clear about what you're not looking for. And I think once people begin to understand the logic of building good prompts, that will probably help them leap forward in any skill development that they're currently working on. And that skill development is constant.
Yeah. I just got back from a conference a couple of days ago, DHIS, the Digital Healthcare Innovation Summit here in Boston. And where we were talking about AI left and right, but I don't know whether you should completely shelve that idea that you guys had, because the number one thing, this is an investor conference too, and the number one area that everyone kept going back to over and over again was pharmaceuticals, and specifically drug targeting. There's so much potential because there's so much data there, and there's so much nuance between each one of our bodies, right? That, figuring out who the right trial candidates are, and like all these things, there's so much potential in the space. That's what everyone's betting on is, that the biology piece, right? Like really trying to figure that stuff out. So that's one thing. The other thing is the personalized healthcare. A lot of people will, take that story that you just described and say, geez, these doctors don't know what the heck they're doing. And the truth is that they don't have enough time, nor do they have the insight into all the personal decisions that you make and all the little feelings that you have, right? And so the power of having this health, like I have a health coach, right? But an AI health coach, and I do the same thing. I'm a runner, and same idea, right? Hey, did I train too hard? Should I pull back? Like, what's my resting heart rate? My heart rate variability telling me about my training. I have all that stuff built in to my coach. And then I can take things to my doctor and say, hey, look, like this is my very personalized experience. What do you think about that? Just like you did with your thyroid stuff. And boom, like now that doctor is, equipped with personalized information that you never had, right? And without AI, we wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah. You've hit on something really important, right? We used to just go to the doctor and get a pill, right?
That's right.
And really that's what, American medical system had kind of trained the doctors. It has to be a conversation, and your doctor is not going to make you change your behavioral habits that are causing you to be sick.
Nope.
So if you want your doctor to give you a pill for that, then the doctor will do that. But you have to own the responsibility for your health. I mean, my doctor says she has a handful of people my age who don't take any medication.
Mm-hmm.
What does that tell you about her practice.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Oh man. Yeah, we got a long way to go, but I have a lot of faith. Like I heard someone made a moonshot bet that we, like, in the future, no one is going to have a primary care physician anymore. You're going to be your primary care physician, and you will have to go to specialists. You will have generalists that you have to talk to based on certain pieces of data that you have, but you'll get stuff, medication, blood pressure cuff, things like that delivered to your house. You'll get in-home care. It'll be cheaper. It'll be customized for you. And I think that's panacea. I don't see that happening very soon, but I do think I see a world where that happens for sure. And it's not just because the healthcare industry is trying to be cheaper. It's actually just the more efficient thing to do, right? It puts it back in our hands.
I actually think that it extends the life of the project manager in the healthcare industry. Because, these things, these tools, these new AI tools, particularly if they're connected to telehealth and data delivery, they're rarely seamless, plenty of interdependencies with other systems, and an understanding of how the agent is using the data that's being collected is going to be primary. I think that the domain for project management in the healthcare sector remains vibrant, at least for another 8 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a good bet. It's a good bet for sure. Tom, I could talk with you all day about this stuff, but I think we should wrap it up. This has been great conversation. Tom, how can folks get in contact with you?
Yeah, so I recently started with Rhino Healthcare Solutions. Our CEO, Chris Patillo, has a LinkedIn profile, and I'm on LinkedIn. That's my contact method. Primarily, I don't manage my own website, so you can reach me there.
Sweet. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, Tom. Thanks for all the awesome stories, great advice, awesome conversation on AI.
Great, Alex. So I thank you so much for reaching out. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And thanks to all of you who joined us for Project Zero this week. Be sure to subscribe to Project Zero wherever you get your podcasts, and we will catch you next time with another great project leader story.